Hello, Oona Metz. Thank you so much for being on the Positively Joy podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Same here. Well, you are a therapist and an author and a speaker. We're going to talk about all of that. But it's so funny how we find each other these days. And like many times, I found you on social media online. And, since we have begun to talk about uh, healing and redemption for women who've gone through divorce. Obviously, I've been, looking at a lot of people out there who are in this same space. And I thought it was really interesting that you have a new model to talk about this. And I know sometimes we just need to have the words to talk about what we're feeling. Isn't that true?
That is so true. And that is what I'm all about is putting your feelings into words. It really
Absolutely.
helps with healing.
So yeah, so true. So let's talk about that, and you've got a new book coming out, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's talk about the model, and even before we jump into there, let's tell our audience just a little bit about yourself. So just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into the space where you are living in today.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So I live right and work right outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And I've been a therapist for about 30 years. And about 15 years ago, I went through my own divorce. And at the time, I really wanted a support group for myself. I wanted to talk to other people who had gone through it. And I wanted to know that I was going to be okay. I wanted to know my daughter would be okay. And I felt like the only people who could really tell me that were other people who had gone through it. But there was no support group. And so a little seed got planted in my mind. I was already trained as a group therapist. I was already working in my practice with women. And so a couple of years later, I decided to start a divorce support group for women. And I started 3 of them. They are all still going today. And it's been such a joy of mine in my life and an honor to be able to lead these groups. But I was collecting so much good information from leading these groups. The women in the groups would say things every week that were so inspiring and informational and really helpful to each other. And so I finally decided I would just try to take all of that information and write it all down, which I did. And so at the late age that I am now, I have my first book coming out in January. I'm really excited. It's called Unhitched, the Essential Divorce Guide for Women.
Congratulations. I have to say, and I'm not sure, what year did you first start your first divorce support group?
I started it about 14 years ago,
Okay.
13, 14 years ago. So there wasn't much around at that
No,
point
no,
at
you were
all.
absolutely right. And I just wanted to establish that because that is around the same time that I got divorced.
Uh-huh.
And there was nothing. I
There
knew
was nothing.
nothing. Had
Yes.
not. Yeah. Now
Right.
since then I have discovered Divorce Care, which is a
Yeah.
nationwide group, and I don't know when they started, but I just didn't know about anything. And
Right.
even today, there are still people in certain communities and in the church where sometimes it's difficult to even talk about being divorced. So so you're a front runner, an early adopter. Congratulations on that. And so in talking to these women and in just finding out a lot of information, you have discovered a way to discuss basically how we're feeling. And in a blog post that you wrote, you compare it to, like the five steps, like when you find out that you have to finally acceptance. I guess that's where I'm going. The 5 steps of
The
acceptance
grief. Right.
and
Yeah.
grief. Yeah. And,
Yes.
whether or not you go through kind of all these steps. But the steps in divorce grief is or can be different. And so you've
That's right.
modeled that. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. Yeah, so it actually happened while I was writing the book because I got to this chapter and I thought, sometimes if people are going on a journey, and I think divorce is a journey, it's helpful to have a map, right? And to know kind of where you're going, where you've been, to kind of be able to chart your progress in a way, because I think sometimes for people who are going through a divorce, it can be so stressful and so hard and so heartbreaking. And oftentimes they feel like, oh my God, am I ever going to get to the other side? Right?
Yeah.
They can feel stuck in it. And so knowing that there's kind of a natural journey, that there's a map to the journey, that they will get to the other side, I think can be really helpful. So as I was writing, I thought, well, I'm going to look and see what everybody else has said first, right? And so I looked, and a lot of people were using the Kubler-Ross model of grief that was developed in the 1970s. And they were
Yeah.
using it
And I
for
have to
divorce
say, a
grief.
lot of people may know that because
Yes,
it was highlighted in a movie, All That Jazz.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And those stages of grief were started with denial, moved to anger, then went on to bargaining. I wonder if I had done this, if this wouldn't have happened, something like that, right? And then on to sadness and acceptance. And for some people who are grieving the death, that works well. Any model that we have, any stage model, we know that people don't go finish one stage on a Tuesday and start the next stage on a Wednesday. It's never linear. People kind of go in between stages. They might go back a little bit. They might skip a stage, right? But it's still helpful to have a general map. And so as I was looking at that model, I was thinking, this doesn't quite fit for the women that I'm seeing who are going through a divorce. And so it really made me think about literally the hundreds of women I've seen and what are their stages. And so that's how I developed the model. And I think the first stage really starts with heartbreak. And it's either a really big all at once heartbreak that can happen sometimes, especially if it's your spouse who's all of a sudden saying, I want a divorce. And sometimes that happens. You think you're in a good enough marriage. Maybe it's hard, but you think you're going to be together forever. And your spouse comes to you and says, nope, I'm out. Right. And that's a big heartbreak. There's another way that divorce can happen. And we see this a lot. Right now, 70% of divorces are initiated by women. And I think oftentimes those divorces happen because there is a heartbreak that happens over and over and over again over years. Like it's the
Hmm.
heartbreak that happens when you don't feel seen, the heartbreak that happens when you don't feel heard, the heartbreak that happens when you say, I want to fix this marriage, and your spouse says, no, or later, or I don't want to. And so there's a kind of accumulation of heartbreaks until the person gets to the decision to say, this isn't viable anymore, you know?
I mean, it's almost like a numbing of the heart when you go
Yeah,
through that many heartbreaks, right?
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Wow.
And I
Okay.
think after heartbreak, and heartbreak is the initial stage, and I think the second stage is often the longest and can be really exacerbated by the legal process, which is not a good process in our country. Um, and the second stage is the roller coaster. And that's when you feel the total roller coaster of emotions, right? You're up, you're down, you're sad, you're angry, you're relieved. It can be all kinds of feelings. And I think this is one of the reasons the groups you run, the groups I run are so important to kind of normalize that for people and say to people, of course you feel enraged. Of course you feel sad. Of course you're fearful. Of course you're confused, or of course you're relieved, all those feelings. And you might have all of them in a day or an hour, or none of them. But those feelings really come, and it can really feel like riding a roller coaster in that
Except
stage.
that's not fun. Like a roller coaster
No,
sometimes can be
exactly.
fun.
It's different than a roller coaster in that nobody gets off the roller coaster of divorce and says, "Oh, I want to do that again." Right?
Oh my goodness, you're so right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
Wow. Okay,
and
so
then I
let's
think after roller coaster really comes mending. And I always think of that as like taking your little needle and thread and mending your heart. And I think, once the roller coaster stage kind of subsides a little, and it doesn't mean you're not still feeling, but that there can be a little bit of space to start thinking about, how do I care for myself? Because this is hard. And how do I turn my attention a little bit from being always on my ex to more on myself. How do I put my yoga practice back into place? How do I, go back to any kind of faith-based community that I might have that maybe I've let go of? How do I really start to do some repair work on myself?
And let me just stop here and spend some time on mending,
Yes,
because some women don't even know what life looks like, or can't remember what life looked like before the marriage, or perhaps they got married young and they went from the home to the marriage, or they don't even really know how to mend. How
that's right.
are you helping your patients with that?
Well, I think mending is really individual for each person. So for some people, it's about moving your body again, right? And either that's going to the gym, that's dancing, that's yoga, whatever it is, but really figuring out how you move your body again, because moving your body helps to also move your emotions. For some people, it's investing in something that's new. And I don't mean a financial investment because people are financially stressed during
Yeah.
divorce, but is there a class that you always wanted to take? Did you used to do pottery back in college and you loved it and you haven't done it at all? And now, your kids are gone on Wednesday nights. And so maybe it's taking a pottery class, but how do you invest in the things that bring you back to yourself, right?
I'm so glad
The
you
things
mentioned
that you
that.
love to do.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because a lady in my group just mentioned to us that she has Thursdays off,
Hmm.
and through a custody arrangement, he has a child on Thursdays. So she says, I'm looking for something to do on Thursday. She
Uh-huh.
actually put it in those words. And I love this woman, because she is mending. She is
Yes,
investing in her. I see it in front of me. She's investing in
that's right.
herself. But she used those words. I am looking for something to do on Thursdays. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And I think then after mending really comes letting go. And letting go can happen throughout any stage, but I think once you've done the work of mending, it can be easier to really let go. And when I talk about letting go, it's not just letting go of your spouse or letting go of your marriage. It's also letting go of certain parts of your identity. And that's a hard part. I think people who are not getting divorced, they just think that divorce is about you and your spouse and that relationship, but it's not. It's really about an entire transformation of the self, right? So you're letting go of your identity as a married person. You're letting go of your identity as somebody who's in an intact family. And oftentimes, what I find is that sometimes, especially if people have been in an abusive, physically or emotionally abusive relationship, it's also a time where they begin to assess their other relationships too. And maybe they have kind of an abusive boss and they decide it's also time to let go of my abusive boss. It's time to work. So it's really a time of transformation, I think, and allows for more healing. Yep. Yep. And then the final stage is really about moving on, you know, and when I say moving on, I don't mean you forget that you're divorced or your divorce is no longer a part of the divorce is always going to be part of you. It's always going to be part of your history. It's always going to be part of your identity, who you are. And if you're co-parenting, it may be a daily
Yeah.
reminder that you're divorced. And so it doesn't mean forgetting, but it means putting your energy into another bucket. And that might mean another relationship, but might not. Might mean you're putting your energy into going back to grad school, or you're putting your energy into volunteering, or you're deciding that you want to travel more. So, something that is about you, and not about so much about the divorce, the divorce, the divorce.
Wow. Okay. So let's take us through those 5 stages one more time.
Yep.
No, you go
So we
ahead.
start with heartbreak. Yep. Then we go
Mending.
through to roller coaster.
Oh, roller coaster. Sorry, roller coaster.
Yep.
Then
And then
mending.
we get to mending.
Yes.
And then we get
Letting
to letting go.
letting go. Yes.
And then
And
we
then
get to moving
moving
on.
on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
having explored these, what would you suggest women how do they take this model and how do they use it?
Hmm.
Perhaps do they journal it? Do they think about it in going through the stages step by step? Like how would they use this model?
Yeah. I mean, I think first, even just having the knowledge, because people who are going through divorce often feel very isolated. People come to me and they say, how is it possible that half of marriages end in divorce and I don't know anyone right now going through it? And so I think hearing the stories of other people or hearing another model is just very helpful, whether they're talking about it, they're journaling about it, they're um, really any way that they're interacting with it. And I always invite people too to say, what part of this model doesn't work for you? What doesn't what resonates and what doesn't resonate. One model is not going to cover every single person out there, right? And so this is a model that I like. That's a model that I developed after working with so many women, but it's not going to be a good fit for every single person. And so, but that's important too. Like how does it work? How does it not work? What do you resonate with and what do you think, man, not so much, you know?
Right, right.
It's
And
not
so
science, right? We're not talking about science here. We're talking about really an art in a way.
right. And so this model is part of the new book Unhitched.
That's right.
So let's talk about the book. You mentioned that you started a group when you didn't see anybody around you doing this, and then you
That's right.
you were so honored to be able to talk to all these women and find their experiences. So we haven't really talked about you personally as yet as well. So tell us a little bit about your own personal story and maybe how it also kind of led to the book Unhitched, which is by the time this comes out, will it be in stores?
Oh yes, you'll be able to get it. It's published by Simon and Schuster, so it'll be available at Amazon and through the Simon and Schuster website and wherever all the bookstores, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So yeah, so let's talk about that and your story.
Great. So my story is that I had a young child. My daughter was just two, between 2 and 3. And the divorce was, not something that I was really wanting, but something that I felt at the time that really had to happen. And again, as I mentioned, it was a lonely time for me. My best friend had also died right around that time from breast cancer. And so I was kind of dealing with the two things right at once, this best friend dying and my marriage ending. And so I think really my therapy practice really helped keep me afloat. And my daughter helped keep me afloat. And my friends helped keep me afloat. And it was then became very meaningful for me to be able to help other people through the process. And so in writing the book, what I really did is it's a very chronological book. And I begin at the very beginning of divorce. So whether it's your decision or not your decision, and then I take you through all the feelings that might happen in either of those cases, and then how do you tell people and what do you tell people, and the fact that you might tell your best friend something very different than you tell your aunt or your kid's soccer coach or somebody who you're not that close to. And then there's a couple of chapters on kids and supporting kids through divorce. And then I have a couple of chapters on the roller coaster, all the different feelings you're going to have. And then on boundaries and renegotiating all your boundaries. That's an important one. And
That's a very
then
important
I
one.
take it
Yeah.
through. Yes, yes, very important. All kinds of self-care tips, and then dating after divorce and all the things that come along with dating after divorce, and really then consolidating your new identity and who you are and who you want to be. Because I really believe that divorce, while it's heartbreaking and stressful and no one wants to go through it, nobody gets married and thinks, oh, I hope I get divorced one day. But even with all the heartbreak and the stress, I think it can also be healing. It can provide opportunities for growth and transformation that I've seen that are really incredible if people do the work of grieving.
The work of
So the book
grieving.
ends really with kind of a sense of like, what is your new identity? And now how do you give back?
Yeah, no, completely. And, you just said the work of grieving. A lot of people just are like, I am exhausted. I don't want to even have to think about doing any kind of work. I just want this
Yeah.
to perhaps just kind of wash over me, and I don't even want to deal with it. But that's not healthy,
Yeah.
I assume.
Correct. That's right. Right. Because I think either then people kind of stay in a somewhat depressed state, or they go out and find another relationship and repeat some of the old patterns. And I think doing the work of grieving really helps them to be insightful about themselves, their own feelings, and what their part was in the marriage and the divorce.
It's interesting because for the women that we talked about earlier that have had the multiple heartbreaks, and I called it
Yes.
a heart numbing, when the
Yep.
marriage finally ends, they may believe that they've already gone through the work of
Yes.
grief. But
Right.
that's not true, is it?
That I don't think that's true for most people. I think there is a lot of grieving that can happen if you're in an unhealthy marriage for a long period of time. But I think divorce is, it's reality. It's real. I always think it shouldn't be a singular word. We shouldn't say divorce. We should say divorces, because there's so many layers. There's so many layers to making the decision, telling your spouse or hearing from your spouse, but then also making the decision to separate houses. How does that work? And moving out or having your spouse move out. And then moving on. I mean, there's so many different layers of it. And of course, the courts, which again, I just think our court system does not help in this situation. I have women who get stuck in the court system for years, and it's really heartbreaking to see that happen for such a long time period of time.
Right. Yes. Do you work with couples who are getting married to talk about perhaps, because no one wants to think about divorce when they're getting married, and I'm not even talking about a prenup or anything like that. But do you believe that couples should talk about separation even at the beginning? It's not romantic, but is that something that we should be thinking about?
I think it's not realistic to think that people who are really in love are going to really talk seriously about separation. I think they're going to say, well, that's not us. We're not going to do that. And if we do, it will be friendly, right? I mean, I think everybody would say that. I think what's more important is really to think about the division of labor, and because that's one thing that I see that happens a lot in divorce is that the marriage works relatively well, but that there can be a big downturn when children are born. And it's not that children create divorce, not at all. But I think parenting adds so much work to the system. And I think figuring out how that's going to work before it happens is really important, because we know the research is very, very clear that in heterosexual marriages, women end up with the bulk of the work parenting. We have the research that shows that. And I think that can really kind of erode a lot of goodwill over time, that kind of inequality. So I think having those kinds of conversations as a marriage gets started or before a marriage gets started is really important, about figuring out how each member of the couple values paid work versus unpaid work, who's good at what. And I don't ever say like people should split everything 50-50. It's not like you should cook 50% of the time and I should cook 50% of the time and I'll wash the cups and you wash the plates. Not like that. But I do think finding kind of an equitable balance, not an equal balance, but an equitable balance is important. People have different skill sets, right? So what's your skill set and what's my skill set? And, you know,
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Can you think back to, perhaps in conversations with women that you've talked to, some of the most maybe small, unusual ways that women have found to help themselves? Like something you might not even, like an average person might not even think of. So you talked about wellness and health and eating better. And I mean, I think those are things that we don't think about. when we are getting divorced that we do need to take care of themselves. But I'm just curious, is there anything else that kind of surprised you? Like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a small but important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing is, and I see this all the time in the support group, is being able to help somebody else. I think sometimes when you're going through a divorce, you feel like you're thinking about yourself so much. But it's also, especially I think this is true for women, it's also nice to do something for somebody else. And that doesn't mean you have to go and help somebody paint their garage for an entire weekend, right? Or like take on a volunteer job when you're already up to here with your own job or your own kids or your own emotional work, right? But even something as small as being kind of extra friendly when you go to the post office or when you go and get your coffee or when you see an older woman crossing the street and you pause, slow down so that you can help that person cross the street, you know? So I think those things can be really helpful and they don't take a lot of time or a lot of effort or, you know, you're making soup and you just double the recipe and bring some over to your neighbors. You know, it doesn't take a lot of extra, but it's something you can do that gets you outside of yourself. And it also may remind you of your value in the world. And, you know, to see somebody's response of like, oh, wow, thank you, you know, that can really help.
I love that so much. No, that is great. Getting out of our heads and helping others. So
Yes.
important.
Yep.
So, Ona, this has been delightful. Thank you very much for talking with us. Unhitched will be available. We will put it in the show notes and your website and
Great.
other resources that you have for women. Really appreciate talking with you today. And, you know, thank you for the work that you do in helping women who are at just a very vulnerable time in life, just, you know, find the support that they need.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And I do have a lot of free resources on my website, which is unametz.com. So I invite people to come. I've got a lot of free articles there, other podcast episodes, a lot of free resources. So please come and check it out.